Well, hello there, and happy Thursday, or whatever day of the week it happens to be that you're watching or listening to this. This is the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint live series. My name is Guy Stevens. I'm the founder and executive director of the Alliance Against Seclusion and Restraint. If you're not familiar with the Alliance, we're an organization that started really to look at a lot of the punitive things that were being done to kids in schools: restraint, seclusion, suspension, expulsion, corporal punishment, often things that are being done in the name of behavior, often being done to disabled children, Black and brown children, children with a trauma history. We've kind of set out on a mission to try to influence changes in not only laws and policies, but the way that children are supported in schools across the country and beyond. Always really excited to say we've got an international audience. And I hope you will keep me an honest person here today and tell me who you are and where you're from. And I look to see some of our friends from across the globe. But please, in the chat, tell us who you are, where you're from, and would love to know who you are watching today. As always, I am really excited to have our guest today. I was just, because we were getting ready to go on, talking to our guests and saying how excited I was. And I really mean that. It's such a pleasure to talk to all the amazing people that we talk to and have the opportunity to share them with all of you in a hope that we're able to make some positive change. So today, I'm very excited to have McAlister Greiner Huynh joining us for a special discussion. We're going to be having kind of a interview discussion, hopefully learning a lot. McAlister, of course, is the educator behind the Neurodivergent Teacher. So I'm sure as I say that, you're like, okay, Neurodivergent Teacher. Probably have seen some of the amazing work that McAlister has done, probably seen some of the videos that have been out there, and really great stuff. So as always, I want to remind you that our session is being recorded. And as always, it's available after the fact on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. We also make an audio-only podcast version available that you can listen to on iTunes, Spotify, any of your favorite podcast software. So with all that, let's get to the good stuff. I'm so excited today. Let me introduce our guest, and I'm going to bring up McAlister here and give a little bit of a background here. So McAlister is a national board certified special educator, behavioral support specialist, consultant, international speaker who calls North Carolina, USA home. That's not too terribly far from here, and a place that we frequently travel through as we've got family in Florida. So we go through North Carolina a lot, usually good traffic in North Carolina. She's been working with and learning from neurodivergent individuals professionally for 12 years, steadily growing her passion for neurodiversity, disability, culture, and radical acceptance. McAlister is the educator behind the Neurodivergent Teacher on Facebook and Instagram, where she connects with families, professionals, and neurodivergent folks worldwide to share philosophies around teaching, self-advocacy, accessibility, coping strategies. And if you're like me and follow McAlister on any of these platforms, there are just, these moments of brilliance that come across and you're like, that's it. So it's always great, McAlister, to welcome someone that is doing this work that I really believe is making a difference in the lives of many kids and many adults. So it's such a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Great to be here.
So we're going to have a conversation today, and hopefully not only a conversation, hopefully we'll have a lot of fun. I do want to remind people that are watching, tell us who you are and where we're from. And I see a couple of people already weighing in here. We've got Becca, an educational advocate from New Hampshire. I've got our friend Floyd. Floyd is tuning in from Tulsa, Oklahoma. And we've got Susan here, a advocate and parent and teen coach from Denver, Colorado. And we've got somebody here also from Washington State, autistic parent and 2 autistic girls with IEPs. My youngest is an emerging high-tech AAC user. That's fantastic. Another teacher here joining us from San Diego. So, and as I promised you, we tend to have people from all over the world. So I'm hoping that my New Zealand friends are not still sleeping because tomorrow is like Friday morning, I think, in New Zealand and Australia. We've got somebody here from Long Island, New York as well. It's so exciting to have you. I've kind of followed you on social media for a while, and there are just these things that would pop up, and these videos that you would do, a lot of the like the TikTok kind of videos and things like that. And it's 30 seconds of brilliance sometimes that you're just like, yes, yes, this is somebody that gets it. So I wanted to start by learning a little bit more about you, kind of your story. How did you kind of get down the road of education and being a special educator? So can you start off by telling us a little bit about, what brought you into education?
Yeah, so I'm from a family of educators. My mom has been a teacher for 35 years. I have aunts that are in education as well, and so I kind of grew up in the education system, and like I never had that weird moment where you realize teachers don't sleep at school because like the teacher that I've known for forever sleeps at my house. So it's kind of a weird thing that you realize when you grow up in a family of a teacher. All these things that people are like, what do you mean the teacher's outside of school? I'm like, duh. Like, but yeah, so my mom's in education. I knew I wanted to be in education when I was in high school. I was in the North Carolina Teaching Fellows program in college. I originally wanted to teach high school English and history. I started out my degree that way. And then I ended up working at a summer camp in Black Mountain, North Carolina for autistic individuals. And I applied for that because my brother is autistic, and I was like, yeah, he's okay. So like I could do that as a job, right? And it was like the highest paying summer camp job. So I figured that was a good fit, and ended up just falling in love with it and like the culture of that camp. It's called Camp Lakey Gap, and it's where I learned about neurodiversity. We watched the film Neurotypical by Adam Larson. I don't know if you're familiar with that documentary, but just kind of learning about what like true acceptance and appreciation and embracing of neurodivergent people looks like. Um, and so I went back to college and I had my first internship in a high school English class. And I was like, oh, I don't like this. And so the like Friday before classes for the second semester were starting Monday, I dropped all my classes, added all new classes in special education, changed my major. And that kind of started me down the road of where I am now.
Gotcha. So you already had kind of a lens from the experience that you had, and I would say that wow, what a fortunate experience, right? Because not every camp that is like that you describe
Right.
has that lens, has that kind of thoughtfulness behind it. So it sounds like with that and your own experience personally, we often find, I think, many people that get into special education have a brother or a sister or someone that they love and get into it in part for that reason, that they want to make a difference. In fact, my daughter is now 13, but I remember when she was probably, oh gosh, 7 or 8 years old, telling me that she wanted to be a teacher and that she wanted to help kids like her brother who is neurodivergent. And it's just an amazing thing, and I think kids sometimes are so insightful, but it's great to hear kind of about your journey. So you get through your college program, and one of the things that I've been talking a lot to a lot of different people about recently is the fact that a lot of our university programs are not really preparing educators for some of the things that they're going to see in our classrooms. They're not necessarily preparing them for having a background or understanding around disability or neurodivergence. They're not really preparing them to understand, if you're an elementary school teacher, that you may have a child that's yet to be identified as a child with a disability that might be having some really big behaviors due to kind of a nervous system that's having a difficult time. And I think that does a real disservice when educators aren't getting that background and things that would really be helpful and necessary. And as a result, when a teacher begins teaching and they come into a school, they're very, I think, easily, well, they're going to be influenced by what the culture and the training is around that particular school. So if they're a very punitive school, that might be kind of what they're introduced to at first. If they're not neurodiversity affirming, that certainly is going to be something they're exposed to. Did you have that experience in your college program? I mean, did you feel that, even looking back now, was there enough focus in those areas? And if not, what can we do about that?
Um, I had one class on behavior in my undergrad program, and it was like behaviorism behavior.
Yep.
So not like positive. It certainly focused on positive behavior supports, but like through a behaviorist lens
Right.
and not
Right.
through a really affirming lens, not through the lens of disability culture
Right.
and any of those pieces. So, and it was not a great class
Mhm.
anyways. But I feel like even then I wasn't to the point where I am now, where
Right.
like I really reject what behaviorism is and stands for and claims. And I wasn't there at that point, but
Yeah.
even then I was kind of like this. I don't know about this.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but that was the
It didn't necessarily feel right, but I
only,
mean, this is your. I mean, you're being taught this in college. I mean, it must be right, right?
yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and it's interesting. A lot of people do not know that after I finished my undergrad, I went and got my master's at the University of Texas at Austin in a BCBA preparation program.
Mm-hmm.
So I did all of the coursework to become a board certified behavior analyst. And kind of after my first half a semester there, I was like, I don't like this. I don't think this is all it's cracked up to be. And I actually ended up my last course for that program. I advocated for doing an independent study with one of my professors instead. And I actually wrote a thesis about how different intervention programs for autistic students and how they are rated if you're looking at them through a culturally responsive lens, through the lens of autistic culture. So,
Mm-hmm.
like, which evidence-based programs are really affirming for our students?
Mm-hmm.
And wrote a
I'm imagining where this is heading.
this is not great, but the professor I was working with was great because he was just like the class that we took with him was like a culture and like equity class.
Mm-hmm.
So kind of my first shift in thinking, one of the articles we read was about disability culture and how disability culture is included in classes and like in the public school system. And so that's kind of the lens that I went with for that. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting. As a parent, we never did ABA. It was recommended to us at one point, but I'd like to tell you that I knew more and knew better and didn't. But the truth was that when it was recommended to us in the same breath, we were told, "Well, your son's probably too old for that." When we started the Alliance, we very much were focused on moving away from compliance-based approaches, moving into connection and brain science and trauma-informed approaches and neurodiversity affirming approaches, all of those things. But it wasn't until I began to hear the lived experiences from autistic self-advocates who are part of our community that I really learned so much about ABA. Kind of prior to that, we hadn't done it. I didn't have much experience. I knew that it was highly kind of out there in terms of being recommended, but the lived experience of the many autistic members of our community and what they shared really informed what became my thoughts on that. I'd had thoughts on behaviorism, kind of all before that, but it's tough. It's tough because I think, many people are led down that road by well-intentioned providers and others. And I think change is coming. I am thrilled to see the voices of self-advocates, and in the case of ABA, many autistic self-advocates who I think are really changing the conversation and are beginning to be heard. But like you, I mean, I think that didn't know much until I really began to learn more and dive in and understand, what were some of the issues that were problematic about some of the approaches. So when I was reading your bio, um, and knowing what I know about you, I saw next behavior support specialist. And, when you see the word behavior support, you often think behaviorism. We often think, I mean, and going back to what you said you learned in college, a whole lot of, BF Skinner and operant conditioning and reward and consequence. And I think we're probably both, under that idea that that's not the way that we should be heading with things. But wow, I mean, in behavior support, in the realm of a behavior support specialist, you're going up against a system if you're coming in there with different thoughts. So talk to us a little bit about like your evolution. So you get your degree, you start off in a school, there were gaps in maybe what you knew, but you had these instincts. Tell us about your journey early on. I mean, how did that journey shift and change as you became a teacher and became the person you are today?
Yeah, it's it's hard looking back on my like first year teaching. It's really rough. The like I had a couple of people that I was close with in the school, but otherwise the school culture was very much, and my teaching experience is in like a self-contained special education classroom with students accessing an adapted curriculum. And it was very much like those students and then the rest of the school, you know? And that was, you know, my first year, my first school, and I'd only stayed there for 1 year. I had a lot of difficulty with some adults and the adult support that I had and how people were trying to support students in my classroom that like I was really not okay with. And then kind of the expectations of like there are some students with some safety needs. So basically you just have to stay in your room all the time. You're not allowed to leave for the last like 2 months of school. And I was like, I'm not okay with this. And after trying to advocate a lot, I just decided it was not a good environment for me to be in. And I made a shift and went to a different school in a different district. And there I had a lot more positive support. There was a lot of push for just like a school culture of inclusion. So while I was still teaching in a self-contained classroom, there was like an elective, like their specials classes. Every Friday they had electives, and kids signed up to kind of do like a peer class with my students, where they were then able to, they like came and helped us at Special Olympics, and in a really like authentic and positive relationship way, and not in the like, oh, you're our little like buddy helpers for kids that are still your age, you know, like, no, we're peers. But like I have a picture from my first or second, not my first, my second or third year teacher, my first or second year at that school, of one of my students who loved collecting like little things. So like little acorns or little pebbles, or like he'd come to school with like his parents' keys, and mom and dad would be like, did he bring the keys to school? So he just had like, I loved to collect all these things. And I have a picture of him and 5 other 4th graders. He was in 4th grade collecting acorns on the playground, and they would bring them to him and be like, is this a good one? Is this? And like, they were just all hanging out collecting acorns because it was something that he really enjoyed and they wanted to do it with him, and just like fostering those positive relationships. And that was really important for me. And I stayed at that school for a really long time. We, you know, at that school did a school-wide autism acceptance celebration. That's where we started our autism acceptance spirit week, where all the kids got to dress up in different ways to kind of learn more about like what it meant to be autistic, and really developed this culture of inclusion. They learned about neurodiversity. We actually did a pre and post assessment for Autism Acceptance Month of like learning, you know, like how can you be a friend to someone whose brain is different than you? And like, what does that look like? And of seeing like afterwards, they knew what neurodivergent meant. And for the longest time, the kids called me, you're that brain lady that came and talked to us about brains. Like, yes, that is me. I am the brain lady. Thank you. Yep.
Well, like, there can be worse things to be called, right?
Yeah, well, and it's definitely better than like the teacher with those kids sometimes.
Right.
So
right.
I really liked the like brain lady.
So just let me interrupt you for a second. Yeah. They knew you as the brain lady. What were you teaching them about the brain that kind of gave you that label? Because I'm a big proponent of a little bit of brain science goes a really long way. And I'm a believer that teachers, parents, and kids need to know a little bit of brain science. You don't need to be a neurologist, but a little bit of understanding about how our own body works and our own brain and nervous system work, I think is so critical. So tell me, what were you doing that got you known as the brain lady?
So we did an activity. We read Todd Parr's book, It's Okay to Be Different. And then we illustrated our own brains to illustrate how they all work differently, and wrote why each of our unique brains was like important or helpful or whatever. And then we talked a lot about like sensory perception and how like it can spike our nervous system in different ways, and like kind of that perspective of like, if you are experiencing this information differently, how is that going to impact you differently? I think if I could go back now, or like the lessons that I tried to support teachers within now, I like looking at more of that like polyvagal lens of pulling in a lot of that more like, you know, this is what you're like, here's your window of tolerance. What does it look like when you're hypoaroused? What does it look like when you're hyperaroused? And all of those different pieces. Yeah.
Right. And your brain is actually wired to keep itself alive and safe. And there are behaviors that are not, in fact, thoughtful behaviors. They're not misbehaving, but, you know, children are sometimes having, you know, stress related behaviors. Getting people to make that mind shift. You know, there's this assumption that all kids' behavior is just, you know, they're choosing this.
To gain or to avoid. Yeah.
Right,
Like
right, right.
classic behaviorist.
That's right. That's right.
Right.
Well, I want to dig into that more, but before I do, I just want to call out a couple things here. One is, kind of a friend and colleague out here that's joined us is
Hey,
Greg
Greg.
Santucci. So great to see Greg. Greg says, with a behaviorist mindset being so prevalent in schools and McAlister being so successful making change in her school, what pushback did she get, and how does she address it? So that's a great question. That's kind of where I was heading with when I said, well, you're a behavior specialist, and your ideas are different. So tell us a little bit about that. In throughout your career, again, kind of with that title of behavior support specialist, but coming from a different mindset, what's it been like for you, and how have you made progress?
Well, it's interesting. The entire reason I started my account and my like social media presence was there was someone at my school that started selling those like puzzle piece ribbons for Autism Awareness Month. And I went to my administrator and I was like, hey, this isn't okay. Here's all the reasons why this is not okay. And like, here are some alternatives. And the response that I got was like, well, then why isn't the district putting that information? If you're saying, oh, this is all this problematic stuff and this is what we should be doing, why isn't someone higher up? Like, why isn't that a district wide message? It's like, okay, well, then fine. I'll tell everybody what it needs to be and I'll figure that out. And so that's began kind of my journey online. And then eventually here, when I got to the point where I was like, okay, I've done everything that I can do at the school level, I would like to go to a different level and see what other kind of change I can make.
Yeah, but no, I mean, I have no doubt that when change is hard, and when you're bringing in different ideas, I mean, frankly, what's being taught today, many years, not many, but a number of years after you graduated and went into teaching, what's still being taught is a lot of behaviorism, a lot of reward and consequence,
Right.
a lot of things that aren't, I mean, really are from a decade, or excuse me, a century ago. We're talking 1930s and 1950s, yet we've got this body of neuroscience, this body of work on trauma that haven't made their way into so many schools around the country. I'm sure, in fact, I saw some audience members here that I know are in North Carolina. In fact, here's one of them, Sandra Dawn, who is in Wilmington. I know a lot of that knowledge has not made it to a lot of the schools in North Carolina or around the country. So it really is tough to feel like you're sometimes going uphill, and people aren't always receptive to what you might be bringing in terms of some of this. So I imagine that was difficult at times for you.
Yeah, and I think it's there are a couple of things that have been really helpful for me. I think one, in North Carolina, we have the Teach program, which I think is a, generally speaking, very neurodiversity affirming way of supporting autistic individuals. It's about increasing accessibility and independence and setting up systems that allow people to succeed in their environment. And so that like piece in North Carolina, I find very helpful because people already have this underlying like piece of that like background. And like Eric Schopler, who was kind of the pilot behind Teach, spoke a lot against a lot of the behaviorist things that were coming out in his time and the 1900s. Gosh, that's weird to say.
Yeah. But
I think like that foundation is a little bit helpful. I have found in North Carolina, so there's a nice like cluster of kind of neurodiversity affirming people from just that exposure. And then with my kind of transition to behavior specialist position, I came to a space that they were doing a lot of equity work and a lot of work on redoing their systems for supporting students. And I was kind of able to come in at a good time to give the lens of neurodiversity affirming, disability affirming support, and how are we looking at this through a trauma-informed lens, through an atypical developmental lens, and making sure we're not just saying, okay, to gain or to avoid. Because sometimes like there are behaviors that like, it is, I'm hungry, and so I'm trying to gain food, and I'm getting engaged in this behavior. But even then, it's just like meeting an unmet need, right? But like then there are also these like, I am completely out of control of what's happening right now because it's a stress response, or like my filter my impulsivity is atypically developing because my brain is neurodivergent, and therefore like I do not have the capacity to like not blurt this thing out. And it's not because I want your attention, it's just because the words are here and I can't stop them from coming out. And so we've been able to bring a lot of light to those different facets when kind of assessing behavior and providing support. So I think a lot of just good timing has been really helpful, and helping approach from a lens of providing additional insights and additional information, and giving, you know, examples. When I was talking with some of my teammates about like, well, what if it's not just to gain or to avoid? Like, what if it's these other things? And I talked about like, I have ADHD. I have significant time blindness. I'm gonna not remember what time it is. And whether I'm doing something that I want to be doing or something that I hate, I lose track of time and I'm late for this meeting that I really want to be at because I like these people that I meet with. I like the work that we're doing. But I lost track of time, and instead I was doing all this data that I didn't want to be doing. And I'm not late because I'm trying to escape this meeting. I'm not late because I want to do this for longer. I'm late because my development is different and my understanding and perception of time is different. And that has nothing to do with our black and white view of to gain or avoid. And I think when I was able to give some of those like examples, it helped kind of, I think, shed some light on like, okay, well, there are these alternatives. So what do we list that as when we're talking about behavior? How do we help teams express that and identify that? And then what do they do with that information?
So, you know, one of the things that we know is that if we look at, you know, kids that I think are more often at risk of being misunderstood, kids that are more often, you know, restrained, secluded, suspended, expelled, subjected to corporal punishment, kids that are often on the wrong side of, you know, discipline and behavioral plans that aren't working. Certainly neurodivergent kids are highly overrepresented on that list. Black and brown children, kids with a trauma history. Thinking about the practices and the things that you've done. I mean, you know, again, there's a lot of well-intentioned practices that are not only not helpful, but if you really stop and think about them, are harmful. And, you know, I'm thinking about things I've heard you talk about as well, whether it's a, you know, a clip chart or, you know, other kinds of, and even things like PBIS, which is positive behavior interventions and supports, which is sounds like it's a really positive name. Often the interventions that are part of that are very behaviorally driven, very rewarding consequence driven. And of course, you know, I'm a believer that you know, kids, you know, kind of in the Ross Green vein, kids do well if they can. You know, it's often, you know, they don't have the skill, the ability. Maybe it's about the experiences they've had. So thinking about all these things, thinking about the kids that are often on the wrong side of this. And I'm going to phrase this in kind of funny way. I'm trying to think it through still, but you know, what would be some of the neurodivergent teacher approved ways of better supporting the classroom? So, you know, if you were to come up with a couple of strategies and tips, so, you know, for other educators that are out there, and we tend to have a lot of educators in our audience, what are the things that you would recommend? Or if parents are listening, what might you recommend that they bring to their team to share? What are some of the things that you found can really make the biggest difference in helping to change the culture and the approach in a classroom?
One of my kind of go-to first things, and I share about this a lot, is teaching regulation in very direct and structured ways that are designed in ways that complement our students' brains and how they're thinking. So, you know, telling a kid, remember, we can take deep breaths in the middle of like an escalated situation is not going to help anyone.
Kind of like telling somebody to calm down, right?
Exactly.
Calm down.
It's not that big of a deal. Calm down. When has that helped you ever? So one of my biggest recommendations is like your tier 1 intervention is every day at morning meeting for a week, you're going to do a week study of a strategy that's structured. And I love to have my little like boxes. This is how I love to structure it for like younger elementary students. But like if we're teaching deep breathing, for example, and we really want it to be meaningful, we might have these little pinwheels, and we're going to take one at a time and take a big deep breath and blow in it and then put it in our little finish spot. And then when all the pinwheels are gone, we're done taking our breaths. And then modeling that for class and having students demonstrate it for the class. And then, okay, after they've demonstrated it, we're now going to put it in our class regulation station, where you can go use it. So that's our tier 1, is like introducing and directly teaching all of those strategies and having them openly accessible for students. And then the tier 2 of that is like, okay, you have your students that are significantly experiencing or are frequently experiencing dysregulation. So what then? So then my kind of tier 2 recommendation is, okay, those kids need scheduled times every day in that regulation space with an adult to practice those skills, to practice co-regulation when they're de-escalated. So this shouldn't be, oh, you get upset 2 times a day, so we're going to send you every time you get upset. No, like when they're calm, have them come choose a couple of activities, incorporate their interests as much as possible, schedule time in that space. That's kind of your tier 2. And then your tier 3 is additional breaks, and how are we kind of individualizing those structures more? Like if this isn't meaningful to them, what else can we do that's meaningful to help structure kind of those supports? So that's like my like number 1 go-to. Have a regulation station in a way that you're teaching strategies and you're giving them the same amount of layered instruction that you would an academic skill. Because kids who don't know,
that's so important, right? It's so
Yeah.
important. You know, if we handled kids that weren't able to read in the same way we handle kids that are having a difficult time, you know, behaviorally, nobody would ever learn to read. I mean, it's just the expectations are so different, and you know, kids often they need to be helped to learn the skills or the abilities, or you know, kind of work through things that may have been traumatic, whatever it may be. So yeah, I love what you're talking about, and of course, you know, that's quite a bit different than you know, putting a kid in a seclusion room, holding the door shut, and hoping somehow magically they come out the other
They
end
just
of that.
come down from that,
Right,
by putting them alone with their big feelings. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, you know, of course, we do a lot of work around trying to, you know, change laws and policies around restraint and seclusion. You know, our feeling is that seclusion is never an appropriate, you know, practice. Putting a kid in a room against their will, holding the door shut, but it happens around the country. And you know, the thing is, kids go in those rooms, and it is terrifying. You know, they beat, they scream. They eventually might shut down, might go into dissociative state. It's really tough. So I love what you're sharing there. I want to take a break for a second and go through. There were a couple. Well, there's quite a few comments. People are really jumping on here, and I did just want to address this comment too, just because we were talking about you know, changing in law. Testified earlier this week in Washington State, who is working on legislation to ban the use of seclusion. Actually, they call it isolation. Same thing. So making some progress. Maxine said, "Thank you for your education and conversation. My 20-year-old autistic daughter has PTSD from treatment in the educational system." Yeah, unfortunately, you know, we've seen that where there's, you know, trauma that happens in a school-based or systemic setting, and there's often a blind spot to that. You know, I mean, you know, we think we're helping kids, and how could that possibly happen? But it certainly can happen. Let's see. Couple. Okay. So Rebecca said, and this was when we were talking about kind of what you were teaching about the brain. Said, I love that. I've done some similar things using Neuroclastics, My Brain Story. Love Neuroclastic. They do some great work there. Let's see what else we have here from Kirsten. How do you help teachers see that a kid's window of tolerance is a can/can't issue versus a will/won't issue? It's mostly a brain difference, not a skills gap.
That is a hard conversation. I mean, I think a lot of paradigm shifting has to kind of happen when you support that. I think a lot of it starts with conversations of kids do well when they can.
Right.
Gotta bring up the Ross Green quote again, of that. No kid wakes up and is like, you know what I want to do today? Like, I want to piss off my teacher. Like that's what my goal is. There's no child that wakes up like, this is what I'm going to do today. Kids are doing the best that they can with the skills that they have in any given moment. And I think part of that kind of belief and shift comes when you start to show here are the ways that we can support this. Here are the accommodations we can give. And then we start to see kind of increased time in their window of tolerance instead of in hyper or hypo arousal. Like, oh, okay, like I see that this is effective.
Yeah. Yeah, and of course, the first and the biggest change that has to happen is not the kid, right? It's the adult mindset, and I think
Well, that's what behavior plans are. I tell people all the time,
yeah,
behavior plan is not for the kid.
yeah.
It's telling the adults what you need to do to support the kid.
That's right, but a good behavior plan should talk about the adult behavior as well and what adults are doing to support a kid. Greg just came in again and said, "Hey, what's up, brain lady?" So that's your new, that'll be your new URL,
Yeah, brain lady.
and see, I'm not exaggerating here. We have somebody from Queensland, Australia, joining us, which is always great. Let's see. Gina said, "My concern is getting the family more realistic support, especially with more children being diagnosed with autism." So I guess that's probably in response to some of the conversations we might have been having around behavioral approaches. One of the questions that we sometimes get is kind of if not ABA, then what? We actually have done a couple of programs on that to talk about some of the alternatives. Do you have any ideas in that space of if you're not going to do some of these behavioral approaches, what to do?
I think when we look and assess behavior from a whole child lens instead of from a behavioral lens, there are a lot of strategies that we can implement. How accessible is the environment for a
Hmm.
student? Starting with accessibility is huge. Like if you, okay, I walk into this classroom and I see clutter everywhere, and I know my students with specific neurotypes are going to see all of those pieces instead of the big picture and immediately be overwhelmed. First thing we can do to increase accessibility is helping that teacher get things organized and cleared off so it's not so visually overwhelming for a student. And as someone who looking around my office has clutter everywhere, I know that's really hard for some people. So like providing support to teachers, I feel like is a big piece. And I think teachers in general, speaking as a teacher, want to do well and right by their kids.
Hmm.
And sometimes they don't have any more like time and capacity and energy to give. So kind of helping them get started is something that I really try to do of like, here, let me bring you these resources that are helpful. Here, let me introduce them to your kid. Um, because it's hard. I mean, public school teaching is really, really hard in general, but like right now it's really, really, really tough.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah,
So
and then like we've said, kids do well if they can. Teachers do well if they can. No teacher goes to school thinking, "I want to restrain or seclude a kid," or "I want to, punish this kid." People get into teaching because they want to help and they want to support kids. But it is a tough time, and I think one of the problems is if you can't imagine another solution to your problem, and this is the only thing it's
yeah.
really hard to move away from that, even if you know it's not working. But I love what you're saying, which is really it's more than just focusing on the kid. It's more than just focusing on the behavior. It's about looking at the environment. It's about understanding individual differences. It's about so much more. I'm a proponent of kind of the social model of disability over the medical model, which I imagine you are as well, which is a totally different mindset as well, which is saying, let's not pathologize and say, this is a deficit or this is what's wrong with somebody, but let's look at how we can make changes in the environment to support all people. Which sounds kind of, along the vein of what you're saying as well. Like, how can we
Mhm.
appropriately accommodate? I remember since Greg's here, having a conversation with Greg when he was on at one point, and I'm like, it's not the functional behavioral assessment that's needed, but maybe it's an environmental assessment. Before we look at the kid, let's look at all the other factors that are around
Mhm.
and see if we can figure out what. Stuart Shanker from Self Reg, wrote a great book. He often says the important questions are why and why now, right?
Mhm.
It's not just why, but why is it happening now?
Mhm.
And there's so much that can come from so many different sources other than the child.
Mhm. I have a kind of SEL and behavior tier one self assessment checklist thing that I provide to teachers sometimes to take time to look at. Okay, like here are the things that we know research based increases success for students. So like how many of those things are you currently doing, and like what areas do you want to kind of try to target to help improve that piece, and that includes things from the Castle SEL framework. It includes things from like the teach approach, as well as culturally responsive, culturally informed, trauma responsive, trauma informed practice of just like how are we hitting these pieces of what our classroom community and culture and setup should be, so that we're taking away as many barriers as possible
Mhm,
to
mhm.
help increase student success.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got something here from, again, Sandra, who's in North Carolina there with you. And Sandra says, I've seen a lot of pushback from teachers, particularly general education teachers, that they should not be expected to deal with many of the student behaviors present in the classroom. And many times I've seen children, particularly special education children, vilified, leading to a push to get some children out of the classroom. How can we promote inclusive learning spaces and help gen ed teachers understand that our children belong?
A big recommendation that I like to give teachers and schools and programs that like is kind of met with mixed results. It kind of depends on the kind of culture. Is instead of when you call and you need help in your classroom and asking admin and admin coming and taking the kid away that needs behavior support. I have always recommended have your administrator take over teaching the lesson and then the teacher sit and co-regulate and help that student get back to the space that they need to be, because then the teacher not only is developing that like
Hmm.
supportive relationship with that student, the principal doesn't become this punitive thing where they come
Right.
when I'm having a hard time,
Right.
and it helps keep the kid like where they need to be, and it's allowing the person who knows that child best, their teacher, instead of the administrator, be the one that's supporting them through it and helping them get through whatever tough thing they're trying to manage in that moment.
Hmm.
And I
Hmm.
think if schools can make that switch instead of pulling the kid out and let's go to the office and have a conversation, whatever, and then come back, if it can be like let the teacher take over what they have already started supporting that kid through, I think it would help with a lot of that kind of like vilification of our EC students and like they just get
Hmm.
removed because they're disrupting the class. No, like administration can take over your lesson plan. Any good administrator can pick up
Hmm.
and kind of do whatever and
Right.
do the
Right.
class while you're supporting the kid that like really needs the most support in that moment.
Yeah, no, I love that. Relationships are so critical. And, I think there's often this thought like, I can't deal with this. And, come take this child away. And, that never solves the problem in the long run, right? I mean, that's a great idea what you're talking about. I love that. And of course, teachers need to be aware of their own nervous systems. And if they're really at a state where they're not going to be effective at doing it, maybe that's not the moment for them to do it. But I think, there's so much potential in doing something like that. We have a lot of people commenting here. Class regulation station. I love that. No more quiet rooms or calming rooms. Yeah, absolutely agree with that. I want to shift gears for a second. We still have a lot of comments, but I want to shift gears for a second. And I want to, oops, bear with me here. I want to introduce you to a student here. So bear with me. I'm gonna bring this student up. The student's name is Larry, by the way. So you might know Larry, and I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about Larry. And well, we'll start out with. Oops, here we go. And if all has gone well, I should be sharing my screen. So
Mhm.
hopefully everybody can see that. Um, can you tell me a little bit about this whole body listening, Larry? Many people may have seen this before, may have seen it hanging in a classroom or otherwise. Can you tell me what this is and what's concerning about it?
Mhm. Yeah, so this is Larry from about I had like 10 or 11 years ago. And he was telling students how he was trying to explain to students what teachers mean when they say you need to listen and what teachers mean when they say they're not actually saying they want you to listen. They're actually saying they want to see these observable behaviors. And that's what Larry is saying. And unfortunately, it very quickly became like I mean and it was presented as
Mhm,
you're not listening if you're not looking at me, you're not listening if your hands aren't folded and in your lap,
mhm,
you're not
mhm,
listening if your body isn't still. And one of the examples that I think is often misunderstood of like your heart is listening when it's connecting with other people. And the only appropriate way to connect with other people is to listen and not to share your own experiences and provide neurodivergent
mhm,
style
mhm,
empathy. It's very standard based when I feel like we all understand that listening isn't a standard. It's just kind of
mhm,
a thing that you do. And
mhm,
everybody does it in their different ways. I have my fidget sitting here talking to
mhm.
y'all. Um, and listening doesn't have to look one way because listening isn't an outward observable behavior, it's an internal experience.
Yeah, and of course, one of the problems with this is that like you said, it's not just one way, but these things are still really prevalent out there. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I hear things like kids are put into seclusion rooms and they're told, quiet hands and feet. You can't leave until you have quiet hands and feet. So you've stressed the kid out beyond belief, and now the only way out is by having quiet hands and feet. My son, I'm kind of ashamed to say, very early on had in his IEP a goal about eye contact, and that was not uncommon. Probably still is not uncommon. My son did not need to make eye contact to probably hear everything that was going on in the room. He was a kid that could be listening while doing something else, while also hearing the conversations that the teachers had about their weekends. And I know that because he'd come home and share those with me. There's a lot of problems with this. And, I mean, a lot of ableism as well in terms of kind of, putting neurotypical expectations on all children. So you and I'm going to go ahead and get rid of Larry here, but we're going to bring Larry back in a second. But we're going to bring back a different Larry, and I wonder if you might talk to us a little bit about this. So bear with me, just sharing my other screen here, and hopefully we'll have. Let's see, there we go. All right, perfect. All right, so this is a different version of this. Can you talk a little bit about this and how it came to be?
So this is a new Larry, and I don't know, a little while ago, I had posted about how whole body listening is ableist, and how it has all of these problematic expectations. And around the time where that had it wasn't when I originally posted it, but it kind of resurfaced and people were talking about it again. One of the original creators and authors of Whole Body Listening Larry, Elizabeth, reached out to me and was like, hey, will you consult on this project? We'd like to make some changes. Can you help us? Like, we're not really sure where to go. And that kind of consultation then became a partnership, and we worked on developing the new Whole Body Listening Larry. Part of that process included focus groups with neurodivergent people to say, like, hey, like, what do you like? Do you want Larry to just go away? Like, we could just take him away and Larry could be gone forever. And a lot of people are like, no, like Larry has like a name and a presence in schools. Like, let's use Larry to change this presence and show how we can know better and do better, how we can evolve, and how there are ways that we could teach listening, because listening is a skill that needs to be taught, and that was the need they were trying to fill. But how do we teach that? We teach that through learning regulation, learning how to read your body's signals, learning what you need to be the most effective listener. So our new poster that came out in, I don't know, November or something like that, we designed to be a collaborative process. So it can be printed for individual students to fill out, or if you get like a big classroom poster size of it, we envision it being used as the whole class talking about, okay, let's collaboratively build this. What are our like listening needs, and how do we ensure that all of our needs are being met, right? Because if you have the student that needs to echo and repeat to process what's being said, we probably don't want that student sitting next to the person that needs complete silence in order to get the auditory information. And so thinking about collaboratively, how can we as a class community make sure all of our listening needs are met? What ways can we problem solve how we're all working together to listen in this space together? So yeah, that's the new poster.
That's great. And I'm going to stop sharing this real quick. My understanding from talking to you earlier before we went on is that there's something else exciting happening around Larry. I wonder if you might be able to share that with our viewers.
Yeah, so Larry, in his original iteration, had two books. He had Whole Body Listening Larry at School and Whole Body Listening Larry at Home. And the one at school became really popular as paired with that poster. And so we are kind of redoing and revamping those books. They're supposed to come out. The one for school is coming out in September, and we hope to do additional work with that as we go. But it's all about Larry learning and kind of being corrected of like, actually, this isn't how everybody learns. Here are all the different ways that we could listen. Here are all of the different examples. And maybe you do something like this, or maybe you do something totally different than what, the examples we provide, but like how there are sometimes people are going to listen best when they're fidgeting with something. Some people are going to listen best when their eyes are closed so they can process the information without having the visual input. That there are all these different pieces that tie into listening, and it all comes back to how we're able to regulate and read our bodies.
So you're an author on this book that's coming out in September, which is really exciting. And I told you earlier, I'm like, when it comes out, not only do we need to get a copy, we want to interview you and talk about the book. So hopefully you'll be able to join us again when the book comes out and talk about it. But that's really exciting. What I love most about what you've shared, and there's a couple of really things that are promising, right? The fact that people were coming to you for input, the fact that you had so many neurodivergent individuals that got involved in the process. Big believer in kind of the nothing about us without us, right? And it's great to use the right words and say the right language, but if you're not actually working with and involving the right people, you don't get the right results. So it's really exciting that work is kind of going forward and kind of moving in the right direction. Rebecca mentioned Autism Level Up has bumper, and I've seen that as well. I'll have to see if I can find that and share that. Well, that's really exciting. That's exciting work. Let me shift into a couple of more questions, because you've really gotten people excited here. We have a lot of people weighing in with different questions and thoughts. Cass said, my daughter's kindergarten class literally clips kids down on the public clip chart for not sitting crisscross applesauce, hands in laps, eyes on teacher. And they have student scouts who are selected by another, to monitor other kids for this behavior. Oh, this is terrible. In public school, gen ed kindergarten classroom in Washington right now this school year. McAlister, tell me what you think about that. Tell me what you think about clip charts.
Which one? Are we talking about the sitting this way, or are we talking about the clip charts? Because there's a lot of layers.
You can rant on both.
Okay, well, the crisscross applesauce sitting, however, whatever that. A lot of people call it "Give me five," like right. Crisscross, hands in lap, feet this, eyes looking, whatever. Right. There will be a new poster that's coming out soon that goes with the whole body listening that says whole body listening can look like, and it has all the many different ways, not all, right. Not extensive, but some examples that listening doesn't have to look one way. It looks lots of different ways for lots of different kids. So Cass, I hope you can give that poster to your child's school to say, hey, look, we can look lots of different ways while we listen.
We'll try to share that when it comes out, so I'll keep my eye out.
Yeah. Clip charts are bane of my existence. Publicly shaming kids for when they're having a hard time. I mean, it's always the same kids that are clipping up and the same kids that are clipping down.
Right.
And it's like, how many times are we going to do this before we learn? Like, we're not doing anything but publicly shaming students.
I guess if you want to do it for all the teachers and staff and they think it's a good idea after that, then, maybe you continue it, right?
Examples of, we did it at our staff meeting and people didn't like it so much. Yeah. And it's just like, what is the purpose here? Are we instructing? If we're just pointing out, like, you're not doing what I want, that's not instruction. That's not providing support. And I think you also have to consider, like, what are your things that you're clipping up and clipping down for? Like, are you really going to clip a kid down because they're not sitting crisscross? Is that worth saying, like, ooh, you're going to be on orange now because you're, doing this one thing? And like, what does it relate to? Like, what is the true goal of it? Is your goal for them to be sitting this certain way, or is it to learn the content? So
I mean, in my mind, the goal is to manipulate behavior, right? It's to make you do the thing you want them to do. But that's not okay, right? I mean, kids can have, kids can have 100 different ways of sitting. You want a kid to be comfortable. You don't want to tell them exactly how they sit. Maybe that's not comfortable to them. Sometimes I think adults' expectations need to be checked. I mean, my son may have been the kid that at story time was running in a circle around everyone else. And, maybe that was disruptive, but the bigger disruption was probably the adults, making a big issue out of it. My son was still listening as he ran in circles, I mean, sometimes people, get on that hill and say, oh, well, this has to happen. They expect compliance for compliance sake, rather than, again, is this actually getting in the way of what we're trying to accomplish here? It's tough. And the idea, oh gosh, I think one of the worst parts about this is if the clip charts aren't bad enough and the sitting isn't bad enough, the scouts, the other students, and again, I think about this having a neurodivergent son. I remember being in situations where there was always the kid that was drawing to my attention anything my son did that was not typical. Oh gosh, it was the worst, but it's the worst for a kid too. I mean, every moment somebody's, oh, he's not doing this right. He's not doing that right. Kids internalize and kids begin to feel like they're a failure, like they can't meet the expectations that are just really sometimes hard for them to even meet.
Mhm. It's so many tangential thoughts that are popping into my
Just
head.
throw them at it. Throw 'em at- We're having fun, so just throw us your thoughts.
Well, I want to talk about the kids that are always on green on those clip charts.
Okay.
But then I also want to talk about peer mediated interventions.
Okay.
And yeah, I'm gonna start with that. My mom is also a behavior specialist. She
Okay.
became a behavior specialist right after me, and so we often call and give each other consults on different things, trying to figure stuff out. She was like,
Mom can join us for the next event. That'd be fun.
yeah, I'll tell her. No, she would not. But she was like, what do you think about this like peer mediated intervention? I'm like, I think about it the same way that I think about how parents are not therapists, they're parents, and peers are not interventionists, they're peers. And it's so often like one-sided, like it's the neurotypical peers that are instructing the neurodivergent kid instead of it being a mutual exchange, which we know from the double empathy problem, it's not a neurodivergent problem of communicating. It's a cross communication issue. Neurotypicals struggle to interact with neurodivergent people. Neurodivergent people struggle to interact and socialize in expected ways with like neurotypical people. We just don't mesh very well. So yeah, the whole scouting and like, oh, you be this kid's helper, or you watch and make sure these behaviors are happening is terribly frustrating. But I also wanted to touch on, I feel like another piece that people don't talk about often, and one of my posts from a while ago has recently resurfaced about the kids that are always on green, but they're always on green because they are doing their very best to hold it all together all day, because they are so afraid of being clipped down, and they are just doing their absolute best to hold it together, which means when they get home, they're exhausted. They've run a marathon all day just trying to keep it together because they're told if I do things differently, I get clipped down and I'm wrong. And I feel like we lose those kids so often. And, they experience significant burnout, lots of anxiety and depression and co-occurring mental health conditions.
Oh, yeah.
And just like, because we have these like standards that aren't real.
Right. Yeah, Rebecca just said masking and burnout, and certainly that can be a part of it. I mean, some kids are externalizers, some kids are internalizers. The externalizers might be acting up, might be getting clipping up all the time, might be getting in trouble. The internalizers are just have the weight of the world on them. Might even go into kind of a productive state of shutting down. I mean, that's not a good place to be either. So anybody that has a classroom right now out there with a clip chart, there are plenty of great articles out there on ditching the clip chart and doing other things. And again, I mean, I guess I could ask you like, well, what would you recommend instead? But I don't even know the motivation behind having a clip chart. Like, you've got to start out with a valid motivation, and I can't even really think of what the valid motivation is other than, yeah, I mean, maybe you can help me here. But
well, I mean, I think it's a shift in the lens of, they're not doing what I want, so I have to make them want to do it. So I have to externally make them want to do it more, versus they don't want to do what I want. How can I help them enjoy this more so they want to do it? So instead of like, how can I force them to do what I'm telling them? It's like, how can I inspire them to be engaged? If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's an interesting way to put it. So what's the answer to that?
Well, I think the answer to that is looking at that accessibility piece, that engagement piece. Like, what is the barrier that's preventing kids from wanting to engage? Because kids are naturally explorative and curious and want to learn. I'm a big fan of Maria Montessori's work, and
I was just thinking the exact same thing. Yeah. I was just thinking, when one kid said love it, then get their hands on things, get them enjoying things. Like sometimes why Johnny's not attending to this activity is it's boring, it's not engaging, and that's not a affront at the educator. I'm not trying to say, oh, they're doing a terrible job, but a lot of what we're doing. I remember when my son was in first grade, really struggling, and thinking to myself, like, I knew how my son learned, and I knew how how capable he was. And I remember thinking, like, he needs like an adventure school, like somewhere where he's really doing things and experiencing things. And, I think all kids, that Montessori, kind of ideology, I think all kids benefit from that kind of approach. But it seems like we keep heading in the wrong direction. We keep heading to meeting kind of arbitrary academic standards to show that, children are passing tests. And um,
Well, and all of the research shows the more time that's spent in SEL,
right.
the higher academic progress
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
kind of spikes. It's directly related to the progress you're able to make academically
mm-hmm,
by how you're building these social emotional learning skills. Because then you have all of, like,
mm-hmm.
you are more able to learn if you are more well regulated. If you have
Connected. Well, I mean, and I think about Bruce Perry, and kind of the neurosequential model, right? The neurosequential model, it's regulate, relate, reason, right? You're not able to reason. You're not able to reach your prefrontal cortex if you're not regulated. You're not able to really successfully reach your prefrontal cortex if you don't feel connected and relating to people. I mean, it's so critical, and we have that science out there, but we don't seem to be doing a good job of bringing it into our classrooms.
There's a quote from, I think it's Natalie Turner, but I might be wrong, that stressed brains can't learn.
Right.
If you're in a constant state of stress, like, you're not taking anything in.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'm a firm believer that, I mean, it's true. I mean, it's not even a matter of belief. It's, if a kid does not feel safe, a kid can't learn. If a teacher doesn't feel safe, a teacher can't teach. So let's shift gears for a second, because these are difficult times. Okay. These are probably some of the most challenging time in education that we've seen for decades. I think on the heels of the pandemic, having, everyone collectively go through this trauma. I mean, honestly, this was a traumatic event for us all to go through, for kids especially. And we're seeing a lot of the effect of that on young teenage kids, a lot of kids that are suffering from that, but even missing that critical socialization and other things that were happening. So we knew, and probably you knew a couple of years ago, that when kids went back to school, things were going to be tough, because here they had these experiences, they had lacked other experiences, and we could have predicted that we're going to see an increase in some challenging, behavior. We're going to see an increase in people not feeling safe. And I'm not just talking about the kids, I'm talking also about teachers and staff. So these are really tough times. And unfortunately, I think those that were kind of, predicting this could happen weren't wrong. And we're seeing this around the country. And as a result, there are people that are focused on probably the same things that you are, in terms of social emotional learning, in terms of, the trauma informed approaches, in terms of the neuroscience and all of these things. But then there are people that are looking at the behaviors and thinking that they need to double down on the things that don't work, like, suspension, expulsion, all these negative things, despite the fact that we've got this body of evidence around the school to prison pipeline and all these other things. We've seen this year a district in Missouri that brought back corporal punishment after having it be gone for 20 years. So these are tough times right now. And I honestly believe that the same solution that's going to help kids is the same solution that's actually going to lead to an increase in teacher satisfaction, an increase in or a decrease in teacher turnover. I think if we can get the right things in our programs, we're going to make a positive difference. But what do you think about all that? How do we, about where we are right now and what we can do to get out of it? I mean, and even social emotional learning. I mean, as you talk about that, there are places across the country where social emotional learning has been turned into a bad word, where people have some really interesting ideas around what social emotional learning is, and are targeting social emotional learning as programs that are trying to, oh gosh, I can't even think of the words they use, like brainwash kids into all sorts of things. So I'll stop, because I've said enough and you're probably already got 5 ideas queued up in your mind. But where are we now and how do we get out of it? Once you answer that question, we can put it in a book, and you're gonna
yeah, just
known all over the world.
Solve all of the public education issues right now.
That's right. I mean, it's probably not a fair question, but I so value your perspective on things, and just kind of curious what your perspective is on the problem.
I think one of the biggest successes I see in looking at different schools and setups, not only in like the schools I'm working with, but like across the country, of when a school leadership team decides that it's a priority, that's when the actual change happens. And that's when schools, I mean, the school that I taught in before I came into this position, the administrator decided we're not doing suspensions anymore. We're just not going to do them. It's not going to happen. And, you know, we went from, I don't know how many we had, but for the last 4 years I was there, we had 0 suspensions, which is how all elementary schools should be. There's no very, very few reasons I would ever say that warrant a suspension. But when the leadership team takes that approach, that's how teachers then feel supported to make those changes. If it's not coming from a higher level, if kind of your school leadership is like, we got to get these scores up, we got to do this, got to do that. If they are taking that approach, teachers don't feel like they have the support to prioritize that in their lesson. So they're like, well, they're going to come in, and for the first 15 minutes of my period, we're doing connection activities. We're building our social emotional skills. We are having opportunities to build relationships. And it gets to like, if you don't feel supported by your administration, right? Like it doesn't work out well. And versus when a school leadership prioritizes that, and it's like, okay, like for the first half hour of our day, this is what we're doing, and this is what this looks like, and like here are the resources. So I think a lot of times it's also teachers are expected to just like make it up. Like there's no there exist curriculums for social emotional learning, of course, but most districts don't buy them. Right. And it's really hard if you're a teacher and you're like, well, like, what does that even look like? Even if your school is saying, well, we're going to spend this time on social emotional learning, but they don't give you anything to do for that. And it's like, I don't like, what does that mean? Like, we're going to talk about our feelings. I don't know.
Right.
And so
just out of curiosity, is there a curriculum that you like out there for any of our educators that might be out there that are listening?
I love the Seabridges curriculum. Okay. It's spelled SEA. Seabridges.
Yeah, in fact, somebody just commented on that.
Yes.
I'd love to know if McAlister has experience around SEA Bridges via the Bridges learning system. Yeah.
I love it. I connected with their creators and was able to kind of explore their program. And then I got to observe a amazing lesson being taught by one of my other district support people, where she co-taught or she taught a lesson on comparing and contrasting Seabridges with Superflex, because the kids had brought up to them, they're like, we really didn't like that because it just told us that everything about us was wrong. And so they did a compare and contrast about the priorities and the approaches and when it's helpful, and like what pieces are helpful, what pieces do you think are missing? And it was just an incredible lesson to listen to these elementary students talking about how helpful that like affirming curriculum was for them, because it told them that your way is okay and we're all different, rather than saying, oh, if you think about things this way, then that's the bad way to think about things. That's the villain that you have to defeat. And
that was the point Rebecca just brought up, that some of the curriculums are actually harmful.
Yes.
I hear you.
And I've also explored a little bit the SEE curriculum. It's social, emotional, and ethical, and it's actually a free curriculum, and it's elementary through high school. And I really enjoyed what I have seen through that. And it gives like really structured lessons. So if teachers are looking at trying to find something to start implementing, it's free. You get free access to it once you do like their, 4-hour module or whatever of training of how to use it. So that's another curriculum I really recommend.
So you're talking about the importance of changes at a leadership level. And of course, those can happen in a couple of ways. I mean, so I'm going to ask you from two different perspectives. If you're a teacher working in a system that could be improved, how do you bring your concerns up to the leadership to have them heard? Or have you had experience with, having that kind of bottom up change?
I think the first kind of step in that is trying to implement as much as you can in your classroom.
And then showing the results.
You're on your own, but yes, and then showing the results. And, if you're like trying this curriculum and you're like, I'm doing this, it's going well, I'd really like training on this. Can me and one other teacher go to this training? And often looking at like Title I funds or any other kind of state-based support funding for PDs, because your schools
Mhm.
actually do have that. You should ask them
Mhm, mhm.
occasionally, but seeing what funds are available for training and just starting with one or two people and kind of like trickling out from there,
Mhm.
is how I have seen, a school go from one teacher is implementing conscious discipline in their classroom to now the entire school is implementing conscious
Mhm,
discipline in
mhm,
their
mhm,
classroom.
mhm.
And how that like kind of transformation can happen, but it kind of starts with you implementing and then you like sharing all those
Yeah,
pieces.
I love that, and I think as an educator, I'm sure it can get really frustrating, seem overwhelming to like change a system. But just beginning by changing what you're doing in your classroom can, and I've worked with a lot of educators who have done that and have been able to influence change. I've worked with others who have done that and created positive change in their classroom, only to have others not value and appreciate what they do. What about the parents? I mean, we have parents, we have self advocates, and others that will go to a board meeting and speak up. If you as an educator, if there was something that could help you by a parent going to a board meeting and speaking up, what would you ask them to talk about? I mean, what might a parent do? I mean, because we do, we have now, mind you, some of these board meetings are not as productive as others. I saw a
Mhm.
video from one in North Carolina actually just yesterday that was rather explosive, but there are some parents out there, they're going to board meetings and they're advocating for positive changes. In my case, in my son's school district, we were able to get the policy changed around seclusion and restraint by working through the board. So the board can have some influence. Anything there in terms of like how can parents and teachers? I mean, we should not be on the other side. We should not be. We should be working together, right? How do we
Right.
collaborate to? A well-supported teacher is going to be much better equipped to support our kids. Any thoughts?
I think on the whole piece, like just thinking about like, okay, we really want to eliminate restraint and seclusion. Part of that also comes with how do we provide the resources of the
Right.
the what else, right? Like you talked about of like if not ABA, then what? Um, and so I think kind of advocating for those pieces as like a joint force of we don't need this, we want to remove this because it's harmful, but like here's what will help with the
Mhm,
problem
mhm.
that you're seeing, that you're trying to use this as a solution. You're trying to use restraint and seclusion as a solution to this. This is what would be helpful. Let's put these two pieces together. Let's take this out. Let's put this in.
Mhm,
Um,
mhm.
because I think a lot of times teachers feel like things are taken away and nothing's put in their place.
Right, 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 right. No,
And
no, I hear
so,
you, and I think that's critical. I mean, it's part of the work we do around restraint and seclusion, but I think even just more generally, anytime that parents and teachers can support each other, it's a good thing. And there are opportunities for parents to go to board meetings and share concerns. And there's a lot of movement right now around the country with some parents organizing and sharing concerns that might not align with everyone. Whether it's about banning books or getting rid of SEL programs. So I think given what we know about some of these programs, some of these social emotional learning programs and their value, we need people out there advocating for good programs and good support for kids. So just kind of thinking out loud about how we can collaborate together. I think anytime we can get educators and parents and families together, I think it's a
mhm.
positive change. So we have gone about to the end of our time here today, and knowing what you shared with me about time blindness, I want to be making sure that I'm responsible here and keep us to what I promised in terms of our time. But this has been a really fantastic conversation. We've had a lot of, I mean, far more comments than I was able to get to in our conversation. The things that you're doing, the work that you're doing is really, I think, making a positive difference. The shift that's happening, and it's people like you that are, I think, really helping to lead some of that shift is so critical in supporting individuals that have not been well supported in a lot of our systems. So, I'm really appreciative for all that you're doing out there and the change that you're bringing about. Um, do you do any consulting with other school districts or training or other things that people might be interested in that, kind of want more of this?
Yeah, so I do provide consultation and training on kind of a case by case basis.
Hmm.
Sometimes it's a good fit, and sometimes it's not.
Right.
So yeah, reaching out to me usually through Instagram and Facebook is actually the easiest way to get to me. I do have an email, but it gets checked periodically, so I usually keep up with messages more, and then I can like come back to them because they don't build up as quickly.
Yeah, no, I hear you. And Sandra, who has had a couple comments here, said, "Yes, can we have her come to New Hanover County Schools?"
Sandra, I'd love to come to New Hanover. My grandma lives in Wrightsville.
New Hanover needs some help. I don't know if you've watched the news around New Hanover, but there's been a lot of things going on for some time. They've been a lot of issues around restraint and seclusion. Recently, it was a 5 or 6 year old that was put in handcuffs at a New Hanover County school. Yeah, there's a lot going on there for sure. But this has been a really great conversation, and I definitely want to encourage people to reach out to you, to follow you on Instagram and Facebook. And certainly want to have you back as well when the book comes out. So that's really exciting. Any final words you want to leave people with? Any final thoughts that you have for today?
That feels like a lot of pressure.
Oh, and don't feel pressure. Just, I mean, I asked you to solve the problem in our schools today. How much more pressure could there be?
Yeah.
So don't feel any pressure. I just, really value the lens that you're using and the work that you're doing. And, even, I mean, the example of the Larry, poster is a really great one. When you take something that's broken, that's harmful, to be able to come in and bring about a positive change is really meaningful to our kids and our educators and our families. So the work you're doing is really critical.
Thanks. I didn't mention, and I should say, the Larry poster is free at everydayregulation.com for anybody who wants to download it. You can send it to your local printer to get it printed, blown up. We also do offer like a printed thing, but it's pretty much 6 or a half dozen the cost wise of whether you order it or you send it to a local printer. So if you want to gift those to any of the teachers in your life, I totally recommend it. It's free. Download it, use it.
Yeah, that's great advice. We always recommend to our audience, if you're an educator, there are things that you can share with the parents. If you're a parent, to share these things with your educators. And again, I think, one of the words of wisdom that you had is like, make a difference for your classroom, right? Start with what you have influence over, make a difference there. And, I mean, it sounds like that's been kind of the story of your career, is like starting off and making the difference where you can. And that's expanding to a bigger and bigger audience. So thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to go ahead and wrap up our broadcast here, but really greatly appreciate it. Thank everybody that was on with us. We had a good group here, very active, and I'm sorry I didn't get to all the comments and questions, but please come back. And if you have others, don't hesitate to reach out. Of course, we've shared McAlister's information as well, the Neurodivergent Teacher. Thank you so much, and we'll see everybody again next time. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.